Ahoy, and welcome back to Titanic Talkline. I am Alexia, and I am joined today by Luis. I'm really going to try this. Ferreiro. Um,
That's fantastic.
Yay. Hopefully I did a pretty good job. Luis, how are you doing?
Thank you so very much, Alexia. It's a pleasure to be here with you and be able to speak about Titanic and everything is we're doing fine. So looking forward to the conversation.
You're in Spain right now, right? And you said it's unusually warm. It's unusually cold in all of the United States right now.
I've seen the news and I just hope that it goes as fast as possible. But it looked really very cold.
It is, and in the state that I'm in now, Texas, they for some reason continue to want to have their own private power grid, which is going very well for them historically.
Oh,
So
okay.
things are going great, but hopefully they'll figure that out one day. But anyway, while just immediately want to start right in, my first question to everyone is always, what is your Titanic story?
Well, actually, it's a long one, actually, and of course, because of
Do
my
tell.
job now, it's a very personal one. I remember when I was, being very little, always watching these National Geographic reports about Titanic and documentaries about, first of all, the story of Titanic and then when Titanic was found. So it was always something that was there. And of course, my
Right.
father was a radio journalist and he
Oh,
had
cool.
a radio show specifically about the fishermen in Spain and their problems and their issues and he was always trying to help. So every April 14th, 15th, he had like a special program about Titanic and he interviewed a few survivors and historians and experts. So every year there was something new coming to my house about Titanic, and then of course. And that's a little bit how probably it became because of this radio show he had been doing for 25 years. And he
Mhm.
saw a few of the Titanic exhibitions all over the world. And then he felt he could do it or in a different way, maybe with a more European touch or something that was a little bit different to what was being done then in the late 90s.
Sure.
About Titanic in terms of exhibitions. So that's
Mhm.
how our company started with a very, very small Titanic photographic exhibition. And that was in the year 2000. And it has been growing and growing and growing in the past 22, now almost 23 years until what it is nowadays. So
I
in
feel
a
like
way,
we've
Titanic has.
Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but I feel like we've kind of buried the lead on what you do. Just really quickly for anyone who's listening, what do you do? Just to give some context to.
Yes, absolutely. Sorry, my fault.
No, no, no. I didn't say anything either.
No, no, I am basically I am the director of Musealia. We are a Spanish company firm creating touring exhibitions that are hosted in museums, cultural venues, and non-traditional venues all over the world. So basically, we started with Titanic and that's what is always so special for us. It was
Mhm.
our first exhibition, our project that really started the company, and we have been doing especially Titanic exhibitions, but also now different exhibitions that go beyond Titanic. But
Mhm.
as I said before, somehow Titanic has always been very constant and very present particularly in my life, of course, because of this connection with my father, and then with Musealia, with our company.
And now you have the exhibition. It's currently in New York, right? It's in New York through, I can't do math, April?
Yes, more or less. It should be probably a bit later. We don't have a closing date as of today.
Oh,
So that's why I urge everybody that is listening to us who have the chance to go and visit as soon as possible, just in case whenever they want to go, maybe they find out that the exhibit is closed and we have moved to a different city. But we, of course, and in a way, talking about the story of the company and my particular story, somehow it feels a little bit like closing a circle by having the
hmm.
exhibit in New York, after
Yeah.
starting 22 years ago. And fun enough, coming the exhibition from London with a small stop in Sweden, somehow it felt like it was very appropriate to to bring the exhibit to New York, and in a way, it closes a chapter in terms of how we have managed Titanic in an exhibition for us. So it's pretty emotional, to say
Hmm.
the least, for us to bring this collection of artifacts to New York and to just have the exhibit there.
Yeah, it it is very circular in the way that you describe, because as everyone knows, that's where it was intended to arrive. And instead, what pulled up was, Carpathia, informally dubbed the Ship of Widows. A very
Mm,
sorrowful thing. And there's a sort of closure that comes with being
exactly.
able to place something where it was, quote unquote, supposed to be.
Yeah, absolutely, and especially because in the case of our exhibitions, these artifacts
Hmm.
are so personal. So we always tried as much as possible to bring artifacts that had a personal story behind, so that we knew who they belonged to, or that basically whether it was a passenger, survivor, or victim, or a crew member.
Hmm.
So in a way, these artifacts, the ring, the shoes, those letters from William Murdoch, um, it becomes so special to suddenly see them. And we have seen them in the case of those who work in the company. We have seen them so often and so on an everyday basis, but of course in different cities, but never in New York. So suddenly to be placing these artifacts and just have these thoughts of, well, this artifact should have been here
Yeah.
100, more than 100 years ago. So it kind of felt also very special. And I know for some of our loan givers, relatives of the victims, it also felt very special, because for most of these artifacts, I would say for 95% of the artifacts, it is the first time that they are displayed in New York.
Yeah.
So, for many, for us, but also for the relatives of those who loaned us these artifacts, it becomes a very special stay in our tour.
Yeah. And for, especially for people who are not just the general people who come to the exhibit, there is a sort of poignancy to it, even if you're not familiar intricately with the story of Titanic. Once you become familiar with the story of Titanic, you're able to put that
Mhm.
full circle together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yes, as you say, also for the visitor, it becomes a different experience to see this exhibition in New York and elsewhere.
Hmm.
In for many, many reasons, of course. And this is something that we have been trying to achieve for years, to bring the exhibit to New York. And it is, of course, a very difficult city in terms of, it is a very large exhibit. It's
Right.
1,500 square meters. So it's very
Wow.
difficult to find the right place with that amount of space for, a number of months together.
In a prime
Um,
location.
Exactly. So, there were a few occasions where we felt it was really, really close, and always there was something that just didn't work out, and we always missed it. So we didn't actually believe it happening until we opened the doors and we saw the first visitors coming in.
I understand that. I think just because I'm a pessimist by nature, so I'm very much one of those, like, it's not real until it's real type people. So I get very stubborn about it. Like, I didn't tell anyone I was starting this podcast, really, until it was ready to launch, because it was like, nope, nope,
Yeah,
because if I say anything beforehand, something insane is going to happen and it's never going to be real. So I understand
that's
the
right.
notion of the tiny superstitions, just because I'm sure with anything, and especially when you're setting up something quite as large as you've described, any shift in the plan can entail a massive delay.
And to be completely honest, also we faced this challenge in New York because the collection of artifacts travels by air because of
Yeah.
being so sensitive, so delicate, and they require special security and temperature control conditions and so on. But the rest of the production, meaning showcases and projectors and lighting and recreations and
Right.
everything that makes the exhibit aside from the artifacts, go by ship, and this, and it was very tough because it actually, the ship got delayed and delayed and delayed, and there was a point where we were not even sure if it was going to arrive in time for the date that we had set, and we had to really, the team had to make a huge effort in order um, to be able to set up the exhibit in a record time and be open for November 11th. So, as you say, sometimes you have to wait until it's real to just be able to share it with everybody, and that made also a little bit even more special finally when it happened, that we could open and to be in New York, and it felt really emotional and special.
Gonna say that feeling of, because sometimes when you're in the thick of preparing for something, you have the blinders on because you don't have time to quote unquote enjoy everything. You have to make sure that it's right. This has to be taken care of, and oh my gosh, that's been delayed. And what do you mean Susan's on the phone again? And can somebody deal with that? And what do you mean there's a delay? Somebody deal with this. Why is the phone ringing again? There's so much happening where it's like you don't have time to actually think about what it is that you're doing. But then maybe not even the first day, maybe the second day or so, when you see everyone coming in and the lights are staying on and the case didn't fall down and everyone
Yeah.
is enjoying it. And it's like, we really, it happened. It's real.
Yes, it was such a relief, because we did, and again, we have a fantastic team when it comes to production and operations, but they had to work into almost the last hour before the visitors were arriving, to be able to have everything set. So it was a very complex installation for the exhibition. We had this logistic nightmare when it comes to maritime shipping, and then of course it is a complex venue. It's divided in two different floors, so everything was difficult. But at the same time, as you were describing, when and when everybody is taking so much care into what they are doing and into the presentation of the exhibit, and then finally they make it, and you're open, and people come, you feel a relief, and you feel just simply the proud of being able to have achieved the fact of bringing this collection, the story, the exhibition to New York after, in our particular case, such a long journey of 22 years since we really started with this project.
And unfortunately, by the time we reach 2022, every single one of the first the original survivors from the ship have already passed away, and many of the second
Mhm.
generation we are also losing them as well, just because it's been 110 years. That's sort of the nature of generational passing. But what did it mean for the ones who were able to make it to the exhibit? Because I'm also sure that not everyone is able to make it for whatever reason, but for the ones that were able to
Correct.
make it, not just for the ones who, especially for the ones who have things in the exhibit but even for the ones who don't. What is it? What have they
Well,
said? What's the feedback from them been like? What does it mean to them?
as I said, it's something special, and we hope, just precisely because of what you were saying, not everybody could make it for the opening for mid-November, but most of them expressed their wish to go to the exhibition in the next month. So those who were able to be there, it's everybody was first of all excited when the news broke about the exhibition coming there, and I had a few conversations with some of them, and I remember, one of them especially saying, like, those little boots were supposed to. My mother was supposed to arrive in New York with those little shoes, and she never, well, she made it, of course, but not on board Titanic. And since then, in this case, we're talking about a survivor, and basically her daughter was just felt very emotional about just thinking of those little artifacts being displayed for the first time in New York after so many years. So I think there's this excitement, and I think there's this emotion that somehow it is a historical event. The exhibit, wherever it goes, of course, it's full of history. But in this case, it's not only the exhibition, but it's the special connection with Manhattan, with New York, and with the story of Titanic. So I think those were the two most common reactions: this excitement, and then at the same time, that emotion that is difficult to express with words, but that is something you clearly see. It comes from the heart, and that is what I felt most of them were experiencing.
That's a it's such an amazing feeling to be able to share with somebody in in that way. I can imagine.
Yes, I mean, and especially also because you were saying, unfortunately, there's no survivors nowadays, and generate the second generation is also becoming of a certain age. It's difficult for them to travel, but they feel a very special link to the story, of course, because of their relative and their family connection, but also because they feel special when they see the young generations, families in the exhibit. We have families from senior people to very young people. I remember one of the first visitors was a boy. He came with his family. He was at 5 or 6 or 7 maybe, and he was obsessed with Titanic, and he knew all the basic stories and dates and facts, and he was so excited to be able to just walk through the first class corridor, or compare a first class cabin with a third one, or see the artifacts. And it's really something when you think of how the story of Titanic is being passed on from one generation to the other. And I asked the family if they had a special connection with Titanic, or with the sea, or with the sun, and they said no, no, no. I mean, we not at all. He has just been you know always focused on Titanic since he was 4 or 5 years, and it's really amazing how Titanic is still able to connect with so different generations in a way that it's so strong and so emotional and so special. So yeah, so one has also this sense of being able to tell the story in New York, and also reach new young audiences that hopefully will continue to pass on the interest on Titanic.
When I just moved from DC to Austin, Texas, and in the process of doing that, we drove through Pigeon Forge, which is where one of the museums is, and I've
Yes.
been a few times, and I really like it. But we're driving a moving truck. We have my dog who
Yeah.
was mad about driving, so
Yeah.
I did manage to convince my mother to stop, but it was one of those like, you be quick. Be quick now. And I only wanted to see the movie costumes exhibit, so I wasn't there to see the permanent exhibit. I did kind of have to rush through. However, in my rushing through and kind of, excuse me, pardoning me, a lot of the people that I was ducking around were very young. I noticed
Yeah.
how many of them were children and families, and I did see two strollers almost collide in the first class corridor because of the mirrors. But there were just so many young kids in there. And granted, I will say some of them were clearly not there of their own volition. Some of them were not
Mhm.
happy, but a lot of them were
Mhm.
really interested. And even the ones that weren't fascinated with Titanic found something to touch or to poke at. And in this particular exhibition, there's a little bit more like a kid friendly
Yes. Yes.
interactive element. So there's more stuff for them to be able to touch. But they found stuff to entertain themselves with. But yeah, it just surprised me how many kids there were. And kids like to regurgitate facts, and so many of them were like, "Mom, did you see this? This is the thing. This is the thing I was telling you about." And it's like they were the ones spurring the interest. It wasn't mom and dad. Mom and dad were following their lead. It was very cute.
Absolutely, and we work with our colleagues from Branson, and with and from Beyond it. We actually display now in New York one of their artifacts, and we will take some of our artifacts to Weekend, I believe, after we close in New York.
Oh, great.
And yes, and one could think also because, of course, time flies. I don't know how old are you, Alex, and I'm not asking that, but most
I've
of
been very
the
public. I'm 33.
okay, so I mean, you probably saw the exhibit. The exhibit. You probably saw the movie, James Cameron movie, when you were. I don't know if you saw it in the movies or if you saw it
I did.
later on
I did.
in the
So I was
movies.
8 when I saw it.
In, okay, so one could think that, of course, your generation, my generation, probably the movie triggered, a huge
Hmm.
explosion of interest into the topic. But of course, when we speak about children who are now 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, uh, probably they have not seen the the movie, but it continues to spark this interest. So it's really, and it's one of the questions people keep asking us when we do interviews. Where does the myth, why, where is Titanic, where is the, how can you explain the myth of Titanic in the sense of this interest that it's beyond different generations and it's a worldwide phenomenon. And of course it's very difficult to explain. There's a few cultural probably issues that could help us to understand why Titanic is this huge platform that each generation has being interested in, and in some cases using the story for their own particular goals or agendas. Um, but we always feel probably it's this kind of human connection. In the end, of course, it's beyond the story of the ship. It's the story of all those who traveled on board, those who died, those who survived, and it's this human connection through the stories that we all know. And there's always one story that surprises you, even you think you have read everything or seen everything, but there's always this thing that is coming up. And for me, the myth and the legend is exactly about that, about the human factor. And that is also, in my case, helping explain why there is this interest in generation after generation in the story of Titanic.
I think that's an important thing to acknowledge because when you don't put names to people and they simply become quantities, it
Mhm.
becomes very easy to gloss over a tragedy or something happening. It's hard to understand when it's just 200 victims, 340 victims, to if you don't break it down into its human element, which is why it is important to name to name people. And I think that's also something that um, is really important in the other exhibit that I know you guys run, which is the Auschwitz exhibit, where it's
Yeah.
important to give names and voices to the people that were victims of the atrocity, because otherwise there is not a whole lot to be learned from it if you're not able to make that real connection to why it mattered.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, um, in the case, and of course, these are very different topics when it comes
Completely.
to Titanic or when it comes to the Holocaust or the case of Auschwitz. But it is about the human link through which we can really understand, and it's exactly what you were saying. We live in a world where numbers don't mean so much for us any longer. I mean, we unfortunately we have been used to listening X number of people have died in this, tsunami or in this war or in this terrorist attack or in this whatever. So, numbers are starting to leave us cold. But of course, if you have to listen to, each of the personal stories of those who become a victim in any historical event, you realize the human dimension that they have, and you realize that, of course, in the case of Titanic, the underlying principles of the story that we tell, and it's an open question, how much have how different are we from them? Of course, society has changed and many things around are different, but in the end, uh, it is about people in most cases who are just trying to make a better life and moving from one place to the other, and they all have their personal stories. There's stories of love. There's stories of just families moving for economical reasons. You just find the very nature of human being, and I think that is also why, in our case, as I said before, for us it's not so much about displaying artifacts, but about telling the stories. We feel that these artifacts are pieces of history that have their own voice, their own historical voice. There's echoes when you see these artifacts, and we always usually display them together with the picture of the person who they belong to,
which is
and we
fantastic.
tell the story, and we tell the story through the audio too. So it becomes this triangle where you have the artifact, when you have the picture of that person, to really just visualize that person, and you have the story, and then when it becomes more powerful, really, to see those artifacts and to understand that they were not really very different from whom we are today.
When I was in Vegas, I dragged a couple friends of mine to the Luxor to see that exhibit. And my favorite display case, I think I've talked about this before, was full of personal pottery that
Mm-hmm.
had been plumbed from the wreckage. So not White Star Line stuff, things that were in people's luggage. And it was a sad sort of favoritism where it was interesting to look at each of these pieces because they were unrelated and just think whose was that? And one of the mugs that I saw in there looked so contemporary. It was kind of like shaped a little bit like mine, where it's like a traditional coffee mug, but a
Yeah,
little
yeah,
misshapen. And it was painted with polka dots. And I just remember thinking, you could probably buy that in a Target. That's super trendy. But today, is this person was
yeah,
wildly ahead of their time. Did somebody make fun of them for this mug where they're like, look at that ugly thing, Janet? Why do
yeah,
you carry that around? Or was
yeah,
everyone like, Janet knows what's up in the future? It's just, it gives you something to speculate about. I spent way too long looking in that case just because, like, who were all of you people? What did these
yeah,
things mean to
absolutely,
you?
absolutely, and that's why also I think somehow, um, when you see these artifacts and you can listen to the story, uh, it becomes a way also, because otherwise, of course, if you see a lot of artifacts, but you don't really listen to the human touch or to the human, there's something that is missing,
Mhm,
and when one just is able to, I think there's a conversation that goes on between visitors and artifacts, and
mhm.
in order to really have a meaningful conversation, you actually need to have the context of, who was that person and why was he or she traveling, and what's the story, as you were saying. And in some cases, we can only speculate because, of course,
Right.
there's an artifact, and unfortunately, it is impossible to identify it with a particular
Sure.
but in those cases where you can actually do it, and you start, I don't know how you call it in English, but basically pulling the string, and then
Pulling the thread.
one thing,
Same
pulling the
thing.
thread, and then so you get to, oh, why was that person traveling, and you suddenly discover, that they were traveling maybe with false names, and why was that? Because they were, in some cases they were just Eddie Klein, for instance. He was basically broke, and he made a lot of money in the States. He went back to Europe. He unfortunately didn't have the success that he was expecting, and in order to be able to just remain a little bit anonymous, he just went with a false name. And then it's the human nature, and Titanic somehow allows you also, and also it's very important to know these stories, because
Mhm.
you do realize that until 1 second before hitting the iceberg, that was being and was supposed to be an important, wonderful journey for those people, and you cannot really understand the drama and the tragedy it meant if you don't realize that, when you read these letters and you see, oh, they were so excited because they were either traveling to the States, or even just because of, even if they were third class passengers, but they were so excited about the quality of the rooms and the service. So it is very important also that, in my particular way, and or the way we do exhibitions, that we can also learn, the importance and the happiness of those just before, the days until they hit the iceberg, and that is when you really realize, of course, the drama and the tragedy it meant, um, the sinking and the loss of all those lives.
It's that's also really important to remember too, because for a lot of people it was a good, oh yay, journey to America. And for some people it was, I don't know, maybe they weren't as excited about it, but for everyone on this ship it was a major life change that they were going through. Like,
Yeah,
it wasn't like today when commercial air travel is much more accessible. I mean, again, even for people in, if you save up, you can, most people can find a way to travel. It's not as big of a deal as it was to traverse the Atlantic than it was, if unless you were the uber rich. This was life
yeah,
changing. If you were the uber rich, this was a Tuesday. But for everyone else, this was, a real big deal. They were going to
uh,
America. Some
absolutely.
whole, yeah, and as you know, some were, just couples, but others were, two, three, four generations of entire families, and newlyweds and babies and the elderly. It was every spectrum of human being with their broad spectrum of problems. I'm sure there were people who were having what they will now think was the silliest fight beforehand. Like, I'm betting you someone went to bed really mad about something as petty as, I cannot believe he buttered his bread like that at the table. And that's how she went to bed.
Yeah,
Like, because that was the
yeah,
biggest problem in this theoretical woman's life until that point. She was, no
yeah.
one, no one, most people don't wander around expecting life altering disaster.
Absolutely, absolutely, and of course, then what happens is that, I mean, as you were saying, first of all, we do have to understand that for most of these people, I mean, most were third class passengers.
Right.
Those didn't even have, they were not even tickets. Those were immigration contracts. So for them, of course, it really meant a huge change. And of course, Titanic, or all the, not Titanic only, but all these other ships,
Mm-hmm.
we would have not been built without this mass of immigration that was going from, in this case, from Europe to the US, or to the rest of America. So, point number one, as you were saying, it was for most cases a life changing trip because of what it meant. And then, of course, you have, this situation where you are thrown yourself into the most extreme situation that one can imagine, and you have 2 hours, almost 2 hours, and then of course you can just see the full range of and scope of reactions and emotions and behaviors from the human being once you're exposed to that situation. So, but again, even before hitting the iceberg, after hitting the iceberg, it is the human,
Mm-hmm.
the human link and human experience that I think makes of Titanic really unique and so attractive for so many people. I mean, nowadays, if you ask a name of a ship to anybody in the world, I would say for a very high percentage, the first name that is going to come up, it's Titanic. Um, so yes, it's really a unique story that we are working with, and I hope the visitors in New York find that, that it means really a lot for us on a human level, that we care about those stories and about those artifacts, and that we try to, you know be respectful, and try to explain and to give space for the personal stories and the human experiences on board Titanic.
It's going to sound like a weird question, but have you ever encountered someone that had a negative experience at the
In
museum?
terms of,
Well, like they
you
were
mean,
they were unhappy
Well,
about it, or they found it offensive, or
yeah, I mean, I like to always be very, very honest, and this is not
sure.
going to be an exception. So we have been 22 years telling this story in an exhibition that has been developing itself and that will
Mhm.
continue to develop. I mean, we have not found yet the the our last word to how to tell this story. So we are always
Mhm.
looking for new artifacts. We are always looking for new ways and to improve the narrative. So it would be impossible. There's no
Sure.
museum or exhibition that with millions of visitors somebody says, oh well, or even what we found. But it's, I have to say also, in all honesty, that it's a very, very small number of people
Sure.
who
Sure.
believe that that the story of Titanic should not be told through an exhibition that is
Yeah.
commercialized in a way.
That was going to
um,
be my follow-up question because I know that there is a small faction of people who do think that it's, any exhibition or any of these museums, not just this one. The reason I was asking was because
correct.
there is a small faction of people who do genuinely believe that any of these displays are, as you said, commercial grabs.
Correct. So we don't, I mean, luckily enough, and of course, yeah, and that's why we have been able to have the exhibit on in one way or the other for 24 years, is because the vast, immense majority of visitors enjoy the experience. But it is true, and we are aware, as you were saying, that there
Mhm.
are people who believe that the artifact should not be displayed, whether they come from the wreck or they don't, like it's our case, uh, who believe also that it's a story that should not be commercialized, as you were saying, in an exhibition or a museum or musicals or books or so and I understand what they say. We do have a different point of view, but what I can tell them is that if they ever give a chance to the exhibit and they, visit, I think they will, as I was saying before, they will realize that everybody involved in our exhibition, and I believe you have spoken to Klaus Goran Wetterholm, our
Mhm.
historian. We are people who, we are. We share with even those who have that opinion. We share the love and the care about Titanic, and when we do an exhibition, as I have been saying all this interview, it is about the people and it's about being able to connect with new generations who are interested in Titanic and who want to know the story and who want to see artifacts and who want to be told the story in a way, in an exhibition, and in a way that it's different to read in a book or see in a movie. So we respect all points of view. We believe that that it is, as long as you approach the topic with respect, and you do it with care, and in our case, of course, most of the artifacts, or I would say, I don't know in percentage, but an important percentage are directly loaned by the relatives.
Mhm.
So they know who we are, they know how much we care, and they've seen how we told the story. And at any given moment, they could say, I would not like to continue with this relationship, and I would like to have my artifact back. So they always have that possibility. But however, they for almost 20 years now, some of them have decided to stay. And I think we keep, actually, as I said before, we keep adding new artifacts and never reducing the number of displays. So I would say, let the best thing is always to give a chance to go and see the exhibit and then make up your mind.
I'm a fantastically tactile person, so I'm always in favor of things that respectfully are able to tell a story. Um, it helps me personally to visualize things. It helps me to see things in context, and I know some people are able to learn exclusively by reading or what have you, and I can
Yeah.
learn the facts, but it's much more for me. It's much more impactful to see the context. And I enjoy that, and I feel like these exhibits are important to people at least like me for that excuse me, experience. And
Oh.
I haven't been able to see the one in New York yet just because logistical reasons, but I do want to because of, as you've said, the very human connection involved with everything that's involved. And for me personally, that's also what makes it interesting, is knowing, whose was that? Where was it going? Oh, this person must really like shoes. They have 74 pairs. Whatever the case may be, you're able to parse a little bit about people by looking at these tiny little factions of their lives. And when I was in Vegas, my friend and I were talking, like, what would happen if in this moment in time something happened to us and they just found like the contents of our bags? What would they think? What kind of people would they think we were? And we figured out that no one would have any idea who I was because I had way too much random stuff in my bag. But the point was, it was one of those things too, where you're like, am I getting then you start thinking, what am I missing about this person? Why they have so many shoes? Maybe it turns out they're a shoemaker. Who knows? Things that, you never think about until you're actually confronted with that. And it's interesting to try to bring those people to life on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. And also in the case of Titanic, there are so many options, right? I mean, you have books, you have movies, you have musicals, you have documentaries, you have different people doing different exhibitions with different approaches. Um, so, there is, um, as I said before, I just hope those who, and I understand their point of view, but if they ever gave the chance to come and see our or any of the other exhibitions, um, probably they can better understand the goal and the reasons and the approach why some of us are doing these exhibitions. And in the end, is exactly what you were saying, trying to bring back a little bit of those stories, of those human issues, for those who unfortunately were on board Titanic, whether they were victims or survivors.
I think I talked to it with another guest on my podcast, Bill Mudrin, and he was mentioning that it kind of brings the Hamilton question into effect, which is the who lives, who dies, who tells your story. And it's very much become about that, in that we're at the part in the Titanic story where everyone who lived and obviously who passed on the Titanic is gone, and all that's left is the people left to tell the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And to tell the story, and then we have the artifacts,
Mm-hmm.
which are, as I said before, they have their historical echoes, and we display them in our case in a as much as possible in a very simple way, very accessible if you want, because we want these artifacts to speak by themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also fascinating to see the reaction of visitors and to understand that some of them are really, amazed by the ring, others by the shoes, others by the letters. The documents are actually, for maybe the vast majority of visitors, are flat artifacts, and but it's actually fascinating because of course they give so much information about the people who wrote something. We have the letters that William Murdoch wrote
I
on
want to
board
see
Titanic,
those.
or from and it's fascinating, of course. In the case of the April 11th, he writes about the speed, he writes about the weather, he writes about the strike, the cold strike. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it gives you such a good information, and we have quite a few of these letters from crew members, from especially passengers. And as I said before, of course, we have the only diary that we know of, at least, that was written until the day of the sinking. And it's really amazing to see clearly that there is this pattern, as I was saying before, of how important and how magnific it was, the trip
Mm-hmm.
for them, until, of course, the moment of the collision with the iceberg. So it's just documents. I am particularly fascinated by documents because you see somebody
Hmm.
explaining something, and so many people spend a lot of time going through these letters. We have the translation in most cases, and others just prefer maybe the big models or the recreations or the piece of gold that comes from the wreck, and it's also very interesting to see how different people are, you know, touched by different artifacts.
What's your favorite? I'm sure that it's hard to pick one, but
It is because I have been so much involved and so many years, and more importantly, of course, I know the story of the artifact. I know the
yeah,
artifact, but I know also the person who loaned it to us. So I always have,
that
like
counts.
the face of the, of Jordis also, or Gunilla Hendrup, or so many others, or Joan Randall. Who are giving us these
Hmm.
items from their relatives, their mother, and or their father, or this and that, and so I also know, that person nowadays who has such a direct link to the artifact and to the story of Titanic.
Hmm.
So it's very difficult because in a way it's like choosing between people, and for me, yeah, it's very complex. But the story of the ring is
Hmm.
fascinating. Um, but I like, as I said before, um, because I'm so much into history and understanding the underlying principles. What is the story really about beyond Titanic and the myth and the legend and so on. So I think documents, those letters, the diary, there's a postcard from a third class passenger, Carl Robert Carlson. These artifacts really help you, one, understand who was that person, which is extremely important, and of course they give you the context into understanding the story of Titanic in a general way. And then it's like everything is easier to understand in the story of Titanic as in the large picture when you have access to documents and to these artifacts and letters. So I would, if I had to choose, I would go to any of the letters probably.
I'm partial to teacups and letters. Because apparently I'm a Victorian woman, but that I don't know why. I think for me there's something because everyone today it's coffee for most people, but everyone would drink their tea or coffee in the morning. So these personal tea and coffee mugs to me are very interesting. And as you said, letters are extremely personal. Um,
Absolutely.
because there's a lot of implied context in a letter. If I write a letter to my brother, I don't need to contextualize my mother, whose name is and was born in. I just have to say, Mom says.
Yeah.
There's a lot of implicit understanding in a letter, and also there's a lot of weird specificity, like as you mentioned, things like the coal strikes that help to put things into context for not only who the person was, but what was happening at the time. Because as you mentioned, our society has changed a lot since then. There's a lot of similarities, but there are a lot of visible behavioral differences that you only really note when you look at, letters and photos and things.
Absolutely. And for me is to see the whole puzzle come together, because of course, as you were saying, in the letters we have a lot of information about the context of that person, but then it also makes sense with all the other things. We were talking about third class passengers. We have a few of these tickets, and in some cases we know, we don't have the ticket, but we know also, in the case of the diary, we don't have the tickets person, but we know that there were so many that because of the cold strike, where they passed from Adriatic to Titanic, and then you see an actual real original ticket where you can see that Adriatic was, you know you see a line that was crossed on the name,
Hmm.
and then you see Titanic, and then you hear, you don't hear, you can read actually William Murdoch mentioning this cold strike, and then you see an artifact of somebody the auditor is telling you the story of this person, and he also bought a ticket for a different ship, but because of this event was transferred to Titanic. So suddenly you see like the dots are connecting, and
Mhm.
it's fantastic when you have that sense that oh, actually it begins to make sense as a whole story. So that's why also I love documents and letters.
I don't remember who told me because that would be relevant information for this moment, but I think someone mentioned to me that they were able to parse together some menus because all the menus were lost, but they were able to piece together some menus based on passenger letters home who talked about the food.
We actually, well, we should check that. We do, for instance, display an original third class
Mhm.
menu from April 14th. So there, it
Some were
depends, of
some were
course, in which
preserved, some were
restaurant.
preserved. I meant more like
Yes,
most of people didn't grab handfuls of menus and run onto the lifeboat.
absolutely,
I meant
absolutely,
more like
absolutely.
as a grand scheme, and also they didn't keep records like we do now. There wasn't like, we'll just reprint the Titanic menu book. They didn't have that. So yes, there were some. I
Correct.
didn't mean to imply there weren't any that survived. I bad wording. My bad. Sorry.
No, 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 not at all. Actually, I mean, for us, it took us 20 years to display this particular menu. It was, yes, it was December 2021 in London when we
Oh,
were able finally to get this menu on into the exhibit. And I think it's a very rare piece. I don't think there are many existing in the world.
mm-mm.
But again, it's about documents, of course. um, they help you get the large picture, and they actually help you connect so many different stories. But I am I also understand, and again, it's probably because of me working in this for so long. I understand that the first impact when you go into an exhibition and you have not been to Titanic Museum before, and you suddenly see a pair of shoes or a mug, as you were saying, or a ring, or this kind of three-dimensional artifact that immediately you suddenly visualize that person, especially, of course, if you're being told the story, and you can see the picture of that individual. So I do realize the strong power, immediate power of those artifacts, versus those like letters and documents that require a little bit more. They're not visually that appealing, if you want, or powerful, and they require a little bit more of work on the visitor's side to really take the most of their story.
Uh, For the people that do take the time to read, the letters and the postcards and stuff, there's a lot of little fun pieces of anecdotal information that you can pick up that help really round out that picture of what life was like back then.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, in a way, Titanic, of course, is this huge, as you were saying, puzzle, and we like to think that in a way the exhibit is a humble contribution to this goal of better understanding, one, the human tragedy, the human dimension, and these personal stories, and two, of course, the you know Titanic as a metaphor, as a symbol, as a myth, and how in this particular case, and this is also something the exhibition does, to deconstruct a little bit the myth, and to understand uh, that in the very end, it's a human tragedy, and it's a
Mhm.
human tragedy of it's a story of failure after failure, and legal failure, and then of course how British society and the world entirely was able to turn this story of failure into the story of the myth and the legend, and the musicians playing in until the last moment, and the captain be British, and all these kind of things that and I think anthropologically speaking, it's absolutely fascinating to understand how the British were able to turn around this story. I don't know if consciously or unconsciously, but fascinating from any point of view.
Kind of reminds me a bit of the like lifeboat paradox, where not a single man got into a lifeboat. They all jumped into the water and swam to a lifeboat and were pulled from the water because it was too. You could not admit that you just
Yeah,
boarded a lifeboat, even though Officer Murdoch was letting men board. So it wasn't like you didn't elbow a woman out of the way for your spot. You boarded
correct.
because you were allowed on, and but there was simply no way you could say that.
Exactly. That is exactly the point. When you, and this is also something that it's easier to understand through documents than maybe through three-dimensional artifacts. In order to understand the story of Titanic and how the legend is built and how the myth is created and how it's used for one or the other goal, you do have to understand the world in 1912.
Yes.
And not only politically speaking, but socially speaking, and the general ethic, morale
Mhm.
from these societies. So it is exactly what you were saying. I mean, of course, we all know there is a book by a relative, I believe, I don't remember the name, about Ismay.
Understanding J. Bruce Ismay
Egas.
by Cliff Ismay.
Exactly. It is about that. It's about understanding that um, you have to go beyond just the moment of Titanic to really understand the behaviors and, of course, what happened afterwards and how society, basically was trying to create a story of a moral lesson of what happened aboard
Mhm.
Titanic and of certain behaviors.
Context is important in any historical event because, as we all know, the winning side, even though there wasn't a winning side in the case of Titanic, but in this case, like the dominant side, that they tell the narrative. And as you said, of all the stoicism and this and that. And it's not to say that we should have told a story of, mass panic and cowards and everything. I don't think that that should have been the story, but it's important to acknowledge all aspects on all sides, and that unfortunately there was a class aspect that affected survival, there was a race aspect that affected survival, and I think we're more open to talking about it now, but excuse me, especially at the time there was just no way to discuss that. It simply would not be done. You just couldn't do it.
Correct. And as you were saying, maybe it's also because Titanic is never ending, and we there's always things that come up. Uh, I see that in the last years, most of the new research it's been conducted into that aspect and to bring those stories, and it's becoming very interesting. And I am sure in our particular case, and I think quite soon all of this new research or new different points of looking into this story again from a different angle are going to be placed into exhibitions and museums, and that, and that's a little bit like we say in the exhibit. It's fascinating, of course, because Titanic had to sink to really become unsinkable, and there's always new angles and new stories that are coming up.
That's so true. And to anyone who is able to make it to New York, I really, really highly encourage them to go to the exhibition because my plan is to go if I can, as soon as I'm able to. But Luis, thank you so much for your time and coming on my show to talk about it. I really do hope that as many people as possible are able to come see the exhibition because I think it's really important that people be able to see these things in person, I think.
Alexia, thank you so very much. It was an absolute pleasure to speak to you, to have this conversation. It's very comfortable and very special also because usually we don't get people who are so interested and so much caring about the story of Titanic. So, it's really nice, and we are available for whatever you need.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. If any of my listeners are in New York or, oh, what was that? I don't know. around the surrounding area, I highly encourage you guys to go check out the Musealia's Titanic, the exhibition, which is currently in New York City. That is Luis and his team's handiwork. I I personally plan on going to see it. And if you're not able to come to New York, hopefully it'll be in a city near you. And in the meantime, if you've been, get in touch and let me know how it was. What was your favorite part? Send me an email, get in touch on social media, let me know your thoughts, and I'll see you next time. Bye.